Hello and welcome to the COOs Corner podcast, episode 12, the podcast exploring success factors in the world of business operations. And my name is Tamar Nelson, your host and a specialist in the area of operational resilience. And today we are exploring the topic of measure to lead or suffer lag. What a COO needs to know about data. Well, that's a deep one. And we have here with us today someone who is ready to share her cutting edge industry and personal knowledge in this area. And she is Jacqueline Davis. Jackie is a CFO/COO executive, delivering critical financial management and business solution support to mid to large-sized publicly traded companies in multiple industries. Her specialty is to align corporate fiscal and business goals for results, partnering with shareholders, owners, investors, and management to design scalable processes and build valuable organizations. And she's currently working in healthcare, a very important area, worldwide today. Welcome to the podcast, Jackie.
Thank you so much, Tamara. It's so great to be here.
Yes, thank you. And we're so happy to have you. And, on this podcast, this is a space where we speak about all things operations and growth and, at a business or an individual level. But one of the things that struck me about Jackie, is it okay to call you Jackie?
Yes, it is.
Is that powerful combination that she has about a CFO/COO. I'm curious to know, Jackie, what led you down this path before we even get into the measurement things? What led you along this path?
So I've always really enjoyed accounting. And I found that really my wheelhouse was operational improvement, process improvement, continuous improvement. I was very lucky early on in my career to work at Toyota, and Kaizen was a big part of what we did. And I drank the Kool-Aid, and I saw the efficiency and the effectiveness and the impact that it was able to have on the business. And that was something that I was always really passionate about. And I was able to use my experience and background in accounting as I moved through different organizations in different industries. That was always the foundation that I relied on, was how do I use my experience in accounting and fiscal responsibility and help the business grow from a process-oriented standpoint and being able to scale and grow responsibly. Because it's one thing to just grow really quickly, but how do we do it in such a way that it is a scalable model? And that's what I'm passionate about, and that's what I enjoy doing. So it's paired nicely with having the accounting and CFO background, but also really bringing that end-to-end process improvement and operational perspective to the table. I think it's good not only to bring the fiscal responsibilities to the COO side of things, but also bringing the COO to the CFO side of things, that we do have to measure the risk and we do have to do what is best for the business. And we do have to measure risk, but it can't be everything we do. So a typical CFO can live in the very black and white world. Where the COO has to come on is there's very much a gray area that has to be taken into account. And then on the COO side, we have to take into account that there is fiscal responsibility and we can't just shoot from the hip. So it's been a nice combination.
I think it's a very powerful combination. I do agree with you. You're one superhuman, and we know this because there has to be a respect for the two, and merging the two together is really powerful. And I can relate to having the Kaizen and the continuous improvement, go right into your DNA so it oozes out. And I think once you really get an appreciation for, continuous improvement, it never really leaves you. And it's always enhances work and how we do things, in life and in business. So I do agree with you. And I will come back to some of what you said a little later in the podcast. But to go back to, why we are here in terms of measuring and leading and how we can actually grow with measurement. Why is measurement really an important aspect of business today?
So it's really interesting. You hear a lot about KPIs or key performance indicators. Every project needs to be measured. Measurements are really, really important, but what is the most important thing is making sure we are measuring the right things, that the measurement is going to drive results. And I've been guilty of this. We've been guilty of this at most of the companies that I've worked for, is that we put a lot of KPIs in place and they're lagging. They're the result. So things have already happened that have led to now you're looking at the result of what has happened. So how do we get in front of that and say, what are our leading indicators that are going to drive the lagging results that we want? And it was interesting. Our president and co-founder, Ryan Iwamoto, has really been focused on what are those leading indicators? Because if we have the right leading indicators, the end result will just come, right? If we're measuring the right things. And I think a lot of times we get into the different measurements that are telling you the end result, but we really have to go back to the beginning to see what behaviors are we trying to drive in order to get that end result.
Okay. So you mentioned a couple of things there, leading and lagging indicators and the differences between the two. Could you give us some examples or how persons can really know if they are actually measuring the right things in terms of the leading indicators and not the lagging ones? Just so our audience can have a feel of what that might look like.
Yes, absolutely. So the lagging indicators are net income, revenue, gross margin. Those are the results of things that have happened that are resulting in that end revenue number. Where the leading indicators are more around, okay, what are the hours doing? The hours drive revenue. How many referrals do we have? How many hires do you have? Who's in the funnel? So if we look at it just from a recruiting standpoint, how many people, how many employees you've hired is the end result. But how are we tracking the leading indicators of how many applicants do you need to have in your funnel in order to have this many applicants go into the pipeline, to have this many applicants go into phone interviews, to have this many applicants actually go across the finish line and get hired, right? Mm-hmm. So how are you looking at the life cycle of what you're trying to achieve and measuring those leading indicators to end in, I want to hire 50 people per month?
So that would put us in a better position that we can actually grow and scale and not really be looking at things after the fact, but actually getting ahead of the game, so to speak, so that we can almost tell the results at the end and can put ourselves in a better position. And I think in doing so, we'll have more resilient operations. Would you agree?
I do agree. And I think the other thing is the frequency of when you're looking at those indicators. Because typically you'll look at it on month end or quarter end, but the period has already passed. What we do and what we've really been able to hone in on is of those measurements that we're tracking, we look at them every week. So if in week one, we'll see if we have an issue and we can course correct so that by the end of week 4, we're making progress versus waiting until the end of the month to look at our data and to look at our indicators. We're looking at them every single week. And in some cases, we look at them every single day so that we can have an impact on the results before we get to month end.
Absolutely. And that's one of the core principles in the Kaizen methodology, to get the data as real time as possible, because that's our, and to respond, not just to get the data, the response is also important, correct? The action to correct if there is any gaps, right? So that is also key. And another key thing that I would like you to touch on is the whole matter of the integrity of the data.
Thank you. That's exactly what I was going to say.
Yeah, could you break this down on how, COOs and C-suite that are listening in can use these to grow and scale, and, what they need to know about data integrity and how they can improve their data integrity?
Yeah, so data integrity is I guess, an interesting topic, because you hear it a lot you'll hear the business say, we don't have data integrity, we can't rely on those results, right? And your data warehouse or your reporting tool, you have to have, to your point, as close to real-time results as possible, right? But you can only rely on that data if it has data integrity. And your data is only as good as the data you're putting in. And that's where I always go back to the process. What is the process for capturing that data? Because that data is then driving decision-making. So we have to be able to rely on it. So how do we do that? We go back to the process and we ask ourselves, what are we entering? What are the checks and balances to make sure that it's accurate? And how do we make sure we're capturing the right data that's going to drive the right behaviors at the right time to drive the right results? And that's different by industry, it's different by department, but you have to make sure that you have a good process in place that is going to capture that in the very beginning and middle and end of your process, or otherwise you're reporting, you have data, but the data may not be giving you the right answer, or you may make poor decisions based on data that you think is accurate, that may be telling you a different story than what is actually happening.
Interesting. So you're saying, based on what you just said just now, we need to really not just look at the end of the process, but at the beginning, at the middle, at the end. And that the information that we gather could vary from industry, etc. So if there is someone in a service organization listening in versus a product-based organization, what would be the differences in terms of how they set up their systems, their measurement systems, their data collection systems, if any?
So it's interesting. I've worked in 5 different industries, and the concept of a data warehouse and data integrity does not change by industry. But the data points that you're gathering can very easily change by industry. So for right now, I'm in healthcare. We provide caregivers to seniors and to children and young adults and adults with developmental disabilities. We are tracking level of service, hours, how many hours of service do we provide? What are our referrals coming in? Where are they coming from? Diagnosis. So the data points that we capture help drive not only behaviors, but it helps us figure out what is truly going on in our business. Are we bringing in good quality business? What is our business mix, right? So I think that there are some things that are standard across all industries: business mix, certain cost per unit, cost per employee, things like that will be standard. But if you're in consumer products, like when I was at Mattel, we were tracking the cost of resin, the cost of packaging, how quick to market, right? Could you get a product to market? Right. So that's where I think the data points can be different, but the underlying concept of the data has to be accurate, and it has to be the data that you need to drive results. And I think that that's where it can differ by company. What is important? What are they trying to accomplish? What is their objective?
I got you. Definitely important for any industry that we collect data and that we have the right kind of data to make the
Yes.
decisions, right? So,
Yes.
when we get the data, there's another part of the whole process, which is to analyze the data. And a lot of times we see persons get into a spiral when it comes to data. Companies will have a lot of data, they're measuring a lot of things. And oftentimes you have to have somebody dedicated just to
Yes.
gather the data, because it is so, onerous. It's a huge chunk of time that's taken. And many times we get caught up in the whole analysis paralysis. Have you seen this happening as well?
Oh, absolutely. It happens all the time, right? Or you think that you need more data before you can make a decision. Yeah. And, one of the sayings that we use a lot is a couple. One is progress over perfection. Perfection is the enemy of good. And is it safe to try? Do we have enough data to at least try it, pilot it, right? And I think having different lenses and different perspectives at the table is really important, because you're going to have people that are very quick to act on your management team. And then you're going to have people that, I don't have enough data, I need to keep going. So how do you bring those different perspectives to the table to really push each other to say, no, but really, like, we know 60% of what we need to know here so that we can move forward. But then there's times where you have to pull people back and say, okay, we just do not know enough at this point to move forward with that idea. And I think if you're in an organization or you work with people that do have a tendency to need 90 to 100% of the data, or you feel like the data is never enough, you might want to try considering implementing like this safe to try concept. Like, do you know enough though that we can do a small pilot, right? So that you can start to show them, hey, this pilot was successful. Okay, now let's take it out to a few more branches to get them comfortable, because the people who will typically do the analysis paralysis, it's the way their brain works. So how do you give them the data that they need in order to feel comfortable? And maybe that's also through curiosity. What do you need in order to make a decision? What is your gap? What is that risk that you see? And how do you get really good at objection handling? Because usually people who do analysis paralysis have an objection to everything. So how do you make sure that you're prepared for that objection handling?
Awesome. Boy, so many gems in that what you just said just now. And what I really like is the whole point of bringing in the people and having different kinds of persons on your team, because at the core of continuous improvement is the people, and to get everyone involved. It's not a one man or a one woman's job. So as the CEO or any C-suite, sometimes we tend to want to fix everything ourselves. And, but it's good when everyone is involved. We're only as good as our teams, as our people, right?
Exactly.
And especially if we're thinking about rapid growth or even scaling, it's important, as you said, to see things through different lenses. And this is where the power of people come into play, right? So the question I have, we have C-suite COOs listening in, and what would you say to them if they want to step into their full power and bring their measurement systems to the next level?
I think really step back and ask yourself, are you getting the results that you're expecting? And if you're not getting the expected results, then break down the process into the life cycle to really understand what are your drivers. What are the key drivers of your revenue stream? What are the key drivers of your funnel? What are the key drivers to hitting your goals? And back all the way up. And when you first do this, and we were like this, and again, very thankful to our president and and co-founder Ryan Iwamoto, like he was constantly hammering everybody on the leadership team of, okay, but go one step back, go one step back. And I don't recommend that you try doing this overnight if you're not already kind of in the mindset of leading versus lagging, because the level of change and the level of thinking for some people can be a lot. Mm-hmm. So how do you take one process or your most important key driver, your most important KPI, and back it all the way back to the beginning of its life cycle and make sure you have a measurement for every piece of the life cycle? Because going back to the simplest, I think, to understand is hiring. We all have to hire. We all have hiring goals. For us, our caregivers are our lifeblood. We have to hire so many caregivers a month in order to meet the demand of services, and the demand for services is always increasing, right? So we had to go all the way back to say, how do we attract our caregivers? How do we make sure we're the employer of choice? Because we know that when you see a funnel, it goes like this, right?
Yeah.
So you have to have a huge number going in because you're only going to have a few coming out. So what does that funnel look like for your key driver?
Absolutely.
I hope that answers your question.
It answers it perfectly. And I mean, you have just been answering all the questions that I have so far, for you. And one that you kind of touched on, but I still want to, highlight it. How do we know when it's time to change what we measure? Because, I've seen where we have organizations measuring the same thing for decades. And this is what we measure. We measure this, that. A lot of them are lagging indicators. How can a CEO or a C-suite executive know that, hey, it's time to change? Or what would you tell them to do to alleviate that?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I think it comes back to the culture of the company, right? I've been very lucky to work with some best-in-class companies like Toyota and Mattel, MySpace, Fox, Snapchat. And when you're growing and everything is good, I don't think anyone steps back. They're like, it's working. It's not broken. Don't fix it, right? Mm-hmm. But where companies have to be very careful and really have to start rethinking things is that sometimes you have brands or divisions that are doing really, really well. But then you have other brands and divisions that are not performing, but you're not paying attention to it because you're still seeing growth because of those one or two brands that are doing really well. And I see that is your single point of failure. Because if those divisions stop doing well or that brand stops doing well, all of a sudden these things under here that you haven't been paying attention to become a hotbed and you're really in trouble. So I think across all organizations, no matter how big or how small, you have to constantly be reassessing. Are we still measuring the right thing? Are we still meeting our end objective? And if we are, great. But at the same time, I'm a real believer in continuous improvement. And I think our industries are changing. The economy is changing. The workforce is changing. There's so many changes going on globally and how we impact each other that if you haven't measured your data and your metrics and your KPIs at least annually, it is only a matter of time before you run into problems. And where we don't ever want to be as a CFO or a COO or a CEO or a president is you don't want to be reactive. So how do you stay in front of these things so that you're responding to the changes and you're proactively building that culture and mindset within your company to improve always so that you're always pushing yourself to the next level? If you're not, you're going to become stagnant. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when.
And that's key for building resiliency, either in operations or in business, that we are making those assessments continuously and being ahead of the game so that when disruptions hit and, we tend to, we'll shake, but will stand firm and can even continue to grow and scale even in difficult times. So it's very important. And I love the point you made in terms of sometimes we're clouded by the one or two that are pulling the organization. And what happens when those get hit? Everything falls down and you wonder what happened. But it's very important to be measuring what matters. So thank you for that. And the next question I have for you, Jackie, as a COO or /CFO, from where you sit, what is the number one mistake that is being made within organizations or even as individuals today in business?
I think I would focus on two. One is what we were just talking about, complacency, comfort, not pushing yourself to be better every day. We've seen many really large, best-in-class organizations be taken down by thinking that their way is the only way of doing things, not paying attention to the changes in the industry. I think the other thing that I've learned over the years is going back to your earlier comment, we are only as good as our team. And I think there's a lot of organizations out there that hire people that are either a culture fit, which I think is also equal to you're just like me. And I kind of relate it back to when I was in public accounting. We were all accountants. We all wanted to be CPAs. We all had the same career path. We all thought alike, and we worked really well. And we were really great at public accounting. But when you venture out and you're building your team, it is so important to have different perspectives at the table so that you are looking at things from different angles through different lenses, that you have healthy debate to get to the best answer. And I think a lot of times people hire based on who they like and who they want to work with, but that doesn't necessarily keep you on your toes. For me, I really like to hire people that are really, really good at what they do. And that needs to balance out something that I am not good at, right? Because if I can hire a bunch of people who are better in areas than I am, and you bring us together, there's nothing we can't tackle.
I so love what you just said. And you touched on something that affects, I think, right across businesses today. And that's important for us not to make that mistake. It's just hiring people like ourselves, with the same skill sets, knowledge, attitudes, etc. Because we have to have that balance that you go back, that you said earlier. That's necessary. And often we make the mistake and push the ones aside that would bring a different perspective, which will only hurt the organization. I've seen it happen many times because those skill sets are going to be necessary, especially in the dynamic environment in which we're operating today. So two very, very important points: continuous improvement and building a team, with different skill sets. Thank you for that. And is there any myth about measurement systems that you'd want to debunk, Jackie?
That's a good question. Probably like all data is good data. I don't think that is actually true. I think just because you build a data warehouse and you have a visualization tool on it, that's not where you're going to get the value out of it. Again, I always go back to the people. We've split our team because you have people who are really good at data marts and getting the data and putting the data in a dashboard. But it's so important to have the people that can data mine that data and understand that data. And I sometimes will use a visual of, you have a bunch of Legos, right? And when you organize them by color, and you're like, okay, now I know what Legos I have. And then you start to build columns and you're like, okay, this is how high the Legos can go. And I kind of think of that as our data tables, right? And then you're like, okay, now I can take this data and I can build something with it and I can organize it in different charts and graphs. But the real key to data is building the house to tell a story. The data needs to tell a story. You can organize the data, you can gather all the data, you can have it on a real-time basis, but if that data doesn't lead to action to tell a story of what we need to do with that data, it's just a bunch of Legos in a box. That's all it is.
Yeah. Can't do anything with it. Doesn't show you anything or share anything with you. And talking about stories, I just want to share a quick one. Speaking to another person in the area of continuous improvement the other day and talking about measurement, and he gave this example of measurement that, you and us probably measuring the wrong thing. Say, oftentimes we measure the sales that we make. But have we ever thought of measuring the lost sales, the sales that we didn't make,
right,
due to, for example, low inventory, not having the product in stock? How many persons walk back out the door because you weren't ready, you didn't have the item in time, because that is really will give an indication of your full capacity in terms of sales. So if you're just looking at the sales that you made, you wouldn't, and projecting based on that, you would be incorrect. So that's just one example, and I'm sure there are many others that we could share, but time wouldn't allow. So we really have to be measuring the right things.
Yeah, no, that is such a great point, Tamara, in that a lot of what we're looking at as well is how many discharges do we have? How many referrals are not coming in the door that used to come in the door, right? Because even though sales may be going up, what is the lost opportunity? And if you're not measuring that lost opportunity, you're going to miss it.
You're going to miss it. And you continue to miss it, actually.
Exactly. And it compounds, right?
Over time. Exactly. And at the end of the day, everybody wants results, right?
Yes. Yes.
Exactly. And, going back to earlier, your role as a COO, CFO, and also being a female in the field, has your role been impacted in any way by that?
Yes, as much as I don't want to say it, there's still a lot of times that I'm still the only female in the room. I'm very lucky to have found a company that we are 75 plus female. There are, of the 4 C-suite folks, 2 of us are female, which is fantastic. And I think, and I also have a 22-year-old daughter, so I'm always thinking about the path ahead and the women who have carved it for us, and then how are we continuing to carve it for our daughters? I know you have a daughter. Yeah, let's carve that path. It's interesting in that I've never personally had anyone push me out or anything like that because I'm a female. I think the thing that I've dealt with over the years is not really truly having a voice at the table, like not being heard. And I've always been an executor, so I've always been picked to execute, and people like to have me report to them because I am such a good executor. But it truly wasn't until I came to 24-hour home care that I was able to really blossom as a female and hold my own in the room and know that I'm being heard and that my voice was important. And I really do owe that to our co-founders, David Allerby and Ryan Iwamoto. They're very supportive of women, and they don't just say they're supportive of women. They let us take charge, right? They let us do what we are good at, and our company is more successful because of that. So, but when I'm working with third parties, whether that's from a legal and a compliance standpoint, from a banking standpoint, it is getting better. But I still do get disappointed that I can still be the only female in the room.
Wow. I asked this question because I know that there are some females listening in, and they often ask me, even especially the young ones that are coming up, just leaving schools, how is it working in that field, being the only female in the room sometimes. So when I get the opportunity, I ask others so that others can be inspired. And we really love to hear that you are doing well, and we can see the fruit of that blossoming in your space right now. And I think over the years, you were growing and just needed the right environment to just blossom, and we're happy for that. So what would you share with any female or aspiring female COOs listening in today? What would you share with them?
So 2 things. One, being a female, especially being a female executive and a female C-suite, it is our superpower. And don't ever forget that. It is our superpower, right? And the other thing that I would say is we have to uplift each other. We have to advocate and sponsor for each other. Because when we come together, there's nothing that can stop us. And the one thing that I dislike the most, that I still see more than I would like, is women bringing other women down, right? And that means we have to have direct conversations with each other. Direct communication is kind. Passive aggressive is unkind, right? And as I have moved up in the ranks, I want to bring as many women with me as possible, but lift each other up. Recognize that being a female in the room, even when I'm the only female in the room, it is our superpower. And when I am the only female in the room, I take it as that is my competitive advantage, because I am the only female in the room. And what am I going to do with this moment? And how am I going to represent? And I think the last piece of it is always believe in yourself. Always. Like, you're never going to have your voice be heard if you're in the corner, right? And just have the confidence to keep putting one foot in front of the other, because hard work does absolutely pay off.
Right.
And surround yourself with mentors.
Yes.
It's so important to have mentors and to have sponsors. So incredibly important.
Right. So we all need our own personal board of directors.
Yes, 100%.
Absolutely. Those are fabulous tips. Thank you so much for that. And I'm sure a lot of persons are inspired by what you just said. The next question, what are the best resources that can help COOs or C-suite on their continuous improvement journey? Like, where can they go? What can they do? How can they learn, to do more in this area?
Yeah, so being a constant learner, right? Always looking at different industries. Just because you're in one industry, look at what other industries are doing, right? Maintain your network of peers and colleagues. What are they doing that's different? Being open-minded to something that maybe works in consumer products. What can you learn from that and apply it to healthcare, or vice versa? Continue to educate yourself, meaning go to webinars, go to conferences, read books, listen to podcasts. There's so many little tidbits out there that you can put into your toolbox that will help you continue to be on the cutting edge of your industry or your profession, whether that's COO or CFO. Continue to push yourself if you're feeling comfortable every day, you are not growing and learning. So how do you make yourself feel uncomfortable and learn something new? And then I always go back to surround yourself with good people. Surround yourself with people who are going to challenge your ideas, because the longer we're at a company, the more comfortable we get. We're no longer looking at what we're doing through curiosity because we're comfortable with what we're doing. So how do you surround yourself with people that will say, yeah, but we've been doing that for 10 years. Why are we still doing that?
Absolutely. We have to get uncomfortable and challenge the status quo.
Absolutely.
And not only in the business, but with ourselves. And,
yes.
I do agree with you in terms of, that continuous learning and that continuous curiosity should never, ever die. And that's one of the reasons why I even started this podcast, was to actually help to bring some of those resources and some of the awesomeness and superpowers from COOs across the world, where persons can listen in and learn from others what they can apply in their own lives and in their own operations. So, you have been sharing quite a number of things, and, we could talk for hours, I'm sure. I'm going to ask you to step in my shoes for a little bit. And is there any question that I should have asked that I didn't ask so far?
One question would be, and I guess you kind of asked this in the beginning, but I gave a very short answer to it because I know we only have so much time, but how did I get here?
Yeah.
Right. It's unusual to have a CFO, COO title. Yes. Because usually they think very differently. And
they're usually at war, actually.
Yes. I also have IT reporting to me, which is very fun for me because I love IT. But I have a very different background from a traditional CFO. And I don't even know if that's of interest to the audience, but the one thing that I would say to sum it up would be especially for younger women or men in their careers, I am able to wear both hats because I always raised my hand for opportunity. And it didn't matter what that opportunity was. It didn't matter if it was lateral. And I did that very early in my career at Toyota. And I became a problem solver. And I became known for solving problems. So when I was at Toyota, I lasted about 18 months in every role. And I did from commercial finance, meaning forklifts and medium-sized trucks, to retail lease, to putting in a system, to being in corporate treasury. And I was in and out of finance. So my recommendation to people is do that opportunity. Don't pigeonhole yourself. Take it, even if it's outside of your wheelhouse. And two, understand the other person's operating reality. And if you go into it and you understand their operating reality, that's where finance and operations can just come together and be so incredibly successful, because we are process oriented, but we cannot help them if we do not understand their operating reality. And if you understand the operating reality, you understand the pinch point, because we are really good problem solvers. So I understand IT from putting in 2 global systems, to treasury, to finance, to working with commercial finance. And it all comes back to, I just said yes.
I can't tell you how much I am happy that I asked that question, because, you have a similar background to myself in terms of being that bottleneck solver. I was, the one that always moved from every year, my title changed. Forklift, operated the pilot boats, railway trains, worked all the different shifts. And that's early in my career, and it has been one of the foundations for my growth, because I've seen where everything that I've been thrown into has made me into the individual that I am today, and allow me to be able to take on some roles that other persons would not be able to. And it would seem outside of the scope of being in operations. And, I always say what you often say, as I said, say yes. Persons always stick to their job descriptions. Okay, no, that's not a part of what my job is. I'm not doing that. Oh no, why are you? And they would even dissuade other persons. Why are you doing that? You don't need to do that. That's not in a job description. Not seeing that these are opportunities for growth.
Yeah.
And there's nothing that you learn that is wasted. Nothing.
Exactly. 100%. It was never about title. It was never about moving up. It goes, let's take it full circle. Leading and lagging indicators, right? Saying yes to opportunity resulted in more opportunity, which resulted in promotions, which resulted in me continuing to build my career. But I never once said I want to be a CFO, and I never once said I wanted to be a COO. I wanted to be learning. I wanted to work with great people who pushed me, and I never wanted to do wash, rinse, repeat. I wanted to constantly be learning. And when my daughter went off to college and we became empty nesters, and she said to me, Mom, it's your turn. It's your turn. Go focus. And at that point I said, you know what? I've been doing a lot of great things in my career. I want to be a CFO. And I was CFO within 2 years.
Wow.
So it's don't focus on the end goal. The end goal will come. The money, the promotion, the title, it will all come. Focus on what you're doing today, and are you constantly learning? And do you like the people you're doing it with?
Wow. What a great way to end the discussion. Powerful, valuable, insightful. But I can't let you leave without asking another one.
Okay.
At the end of every interview, I ask all my guests this question, because I believe that there is power in the questions that you ask. In your career, what is one question that you frequently use when you're working with teams to get the best outcomes?
So this is a new one, and it has been prompted by, I go back to our president, Ryan Iwamoto. We all have executive coaches, highly recommend executive coaches for any C-suite. So important to have an executive coach. But one of the questions that we now ask on a very regular basis is on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being absolutely not, to 10 being absolutely, do you see yourself being here in 1 year? On a scale from 1 to 10, where do you fall that you see yourself being here in 1 year? And regardless of the number they give you, whether it's a 5, a 7, an 8, what is in that gap? What is in the gap to get you from here to a 10? And that, I do it in my skip level meetings. I do it in my one-on-ones. And that has provided so much insight into how my people are feeling. And again, I go back, if we have a lot of turnover, you're having a lot of business disruption. And it's about creating the mindset and the culture of, what am I doing to support you? What am I doing to make sure that you want to be a 10? And sometimes I get 10s, sometimes I get 5s. And I'm like, okay, that's valuable information. What can we do to fill that gap?
So that's the next question you ask to the individual. And then you work on those items. You don't leave it at, okay, I'm a 5. Oh, I have a overall 5, and that's it. But
no, never.
You take steps to ensure that something is done to bring that person from a 5 to a 10. That's a very powerful one. I love it. I love that. And I think if persons, because with the Great Resignation, there are so many shifts, and all persons want is to be seen and heard. And
Yeah.
they know that person, those who lead them really care about them and their well-being. Even just asking the question and making an effort to do something about it can move that from a 5 to an 8 in no time. Mm-hmm. Just by being vulnerable and asking that question, not being hard-headed about it, that people need money and they have to stay. No, They don't. So that's a very great tip and advice to everyone listening in. And I think I'm going to use that as well. Thank you for that. And you mentioned something in the slip of that as well, and I can't let you go without it. Executive coaching, a lot of persons see it as an expense. But what you're saying.
Yes, it's worth it. If you have a good executive coach, and like I said, we all have, all 4 of us in the C-suite, we all have executive coaches that we're comfortable with, that push us. And I can speak to my executive coach he was recommended to me by my mentor, who I've known for years, who knew me really well and introduced me to my executive coach. He is so good about calling me on the story I'm telling myself. And I think as executives, we're not down in the details all day long. And we all have a story that we're telling ourselves. And one of the things that he says to me a lot is like, okay, that's version A. Let me give you version B. And he really holds the mirror up to make sure that I am being the best C-suite leader executive that I can be. And it has to be a safe zone. You have to really trust that person if you really want to get the most out of it, which I do. And he has made me such a better leader because, as leaders, everything's our fault and we don't get credit for anything.
It's a catch-22. So, we caught between a rock and a hard place.
Right? That's just the way it goes. So there's not a lot of people who are 100% comfortable giving you that feedback, but also giving you the tools to understand your personality and how to be a great leader as you are leading through COVID, the Great Resignation, the workforce struggles, inflation, right? Like there's so many things that are getting thrown at us every day that we're thinking about, and really having that executive coach makes all the difference in the world.
I agree with you 100%, because as leaders in this time, we are just told you need to lead, you need to manage better, but not the how. And oftentimes we have a story, a narrative that is in our heads that we repeat and not really knowing what it is, not realizing that we say it to ourselves every day, and that it can actually hold us back from being our best version of ourselves, which means that we're going to hold the organization back from being the best organization that it can be. So it's really important to invest in your leaders so that they can help the organization to scale and grow. And to those who don't, or their companies don't see the benefit of it, I think it is even worth the investment that you do it yourselves to find someone to help you to be the best version of you. So if the company doesn't see it fit, I think as individuals, we should really embark on that journey, because it is a very powerful one when you unleash and
100%
unleash that. Yes. Wow. This was a fabulous discussion, Jackie. You have shared a wealth of information with us today, and I am so thankful that you took your time to share your insights with us. And I know when we first spoke, I said, you said, we may have to talk again, and I really do think so. I really do think so.
No, I think it would be fantastic, and I really appreciate you having me on. You're fabulous. I love that you love operations and continuous improvement, and yeah, you're fabulous. So whenever you want to get back together again, you just let me know.
I will, definitely. And to you, our listeners, thank you for sharing your time with us as well. And I hope you enjoyed this conversation and got massive value from it. I sure did. So share in the comments what you like from this episode, and you can continue the conversation with Jackie. Reach out to her on LinkedIn at Jackie E. Davis. That's JACQUEE Davis, or Jackie Davis. That is JACQUEDAVIS 3100 at yahoo.com. And her information will be in the show notes, so you can grab it there. And I hope that everyone listening challenges the status quo with this information. And I want to hear all about it. And you can reach out to me at Tamar at tamarnelson.com or LinkedIn at Tamar-Nelson. And if you want to be a guest, or if you want to share any feedback or suggestions you may have, please DM me. I'd love to hear from you. Also, please free to share this link with any friends that you think might find this information valuable, and subscribe to the podcast. And if you can, leave a review and a rating on Apple Podcast. So please join us again for another information-packed episode. Until next time, as we say in Jamaica, walk good.
Mm-hmm.